We live in interesting times.
And here are the headlines.
The World Health Organization warns against a global overreaction to the new coronavirus epidemic following panic buying, event cancellations, and concerns about cruise ship travel as China's official death toll nears 1,900.
Apple announced Monday it would miss its March quarter revenue forecast and global iPhone supplies would fall because of the deadly coronavirus epidemic, triggering a fall in Asian stock markets.
And Asia-focused banking giant HSBC axed 35,000 jobs, far more than expected, and posted slumping annual profits as it warned over the financial impact of the deadly coronavirus. I'm Alma Angeles, wherever you're watching from around the world. Thank you very much for joining us.
We welcome our viewers here in the Philippines and around the world. Good day, good evening, everyone. I'm Alfred Asenas from your Hawaii Bureau. Hi, Alma.
Hi, Alfred. And now to the news. The World Health Organization has warned against a global overreaction to the new coronavirus epidemic following panic buying, event cancellations, and concerns about cruise ship travel as China's official death toll neared 1,900. More than 72,000 people have now been infected in China and hundreds more abroad. Although the WHO stressed the disease has infected a tiny proportion of people outside its epicenter and the mortality rate remains relatively low. The outbreak is threatening to put a dent in the global economy, with China paralyzed by vast quarantine measures and major firms such as iPhone maker Apple and mining giant BHP warning it could damage bottom lines. Trade fairs, sports competitions, and even cultural events have been disrupted, while several countries have banned travelers from China and major airlines have already suspended flights. The cruise ship industry has come into focus as hundreds of people became infected aboard a vessel off Japan. One passenger tested positive after disembarking another liner in Cambodia. The WHO, which has previously said travel restrictions were unnecessary, rejected the suggestion that all cruises should be halted.
Measures should be taken proportional to the situation, based on public health, science, and evidence. And blanket measures may not help. So that's what we're trying to say.
This is a very serious outbreak, and it has the potential to grow. But we need to balance that in terms of the number of people infected. Outside Hubei, this epidemic is affecting a very tiny proportion of people. So if we're going to disrupt every cruise ship in the world on the off chance that there might be some potential contact with some potential pathogen, then where do we stop? We shut down the buses around the world, and what happens when other countries are affected? Do we take the same measures in that case? So we need to be extremely measured in what we do.
More than 450 people have tested positive for the virus aboard the quarantined Diamond Prince cruise ship off Yokohama in Japan. On Monday, the U.S. repatriated more than 300 Americans who now face another 14 days under quarantine. Attention was also turning to the Westerdam, a cruise ship in Cambodia where many of the 2,200 people aboard passengers were allowed to disembark after all initially receiving a clean bill of health. Now they were met by Cambodia's premier, taken on a bus tour of the country's capital, and then allowed to fly around the world. But an 83-year-old American woman was later diagnosed with the virus after arriving in Malaysia.
The World Health Organization, or WHO, said the new novel coronavirus only causes mild disease for 80% of infected patients. WHO's Dr. WHO's Dr. Tedros Adhanom said that trends can change as new populations are affected. It is too early to tell if this reported decline will continue.
The data also appear to show a decline in new cases. This trend must be interpreted very cautiously. Trends can change as new populations are affected. It's too early to tell if this reported decline will continue. Every scenario is still on the table. It also appears that COVID-19 is not as deadly as other coronaviruses, including SARS and MERS. More than 80% of patients have mild disease and will recover. In about 14% of cases, the virus causes severe disease, including pneumonia and shortness of breath. And about 5% of patients have critical disease, including respiratory failure, septic shock, and multi-organ failure. In 2% of reported cases, the virus is fatal, and the risk of death increases the older you are. We see relatively few cases among children. More research is needed to understand why. This new data addresses some of the gaps in our understanding, but others remain. The international team of experts now on the ground in China is working with Chinese counterparts to better understand those gaps and improve our understanding of the outbreak.
Meanwhile, a hospital director at the epicenter of China's virus epidemic died, according to state media, the latest medical worker to fall victim to the new coronavirus spreading across the country. The COVID-19 virus, which is believed to have originated in Wuhan late last year, has infected more than 72,000 people and killed nearly 1,900. State broadcaster CCTV reported that Dr. Liu Zhiming, the director of Wuchang Hospital in Wuhan, died Tuesday morning after all-out rescue efforts failed. Now, China said last week that 6 medical workers had died from the virus, while 1,716 have been infected. Dr. Liu's death was initially reported by Chinese media and bloggers shortly after midnight on Tuesday, but the stories were later deleted and replaced with reports that doctors were still trying to save him. After initial reports of his death were denied, the hospital told AFP on Tuesday morning that doctors were giving him life-saving treatment. Dr. Liu's death has echoes of that of Wuhan ophthalmologist Dr. Li Wenliang, who had been punished by authorities for sounding the alarm about the virus in late December. Dr. Li's death prompted a national outpouring of grief.
Meanwhile, the vast majority of people on the streets of Hong Kong are wearing face masks amid fears over the COVID-19 outbreak. A medical expert says masks are necessary to prevent a public health disaster.
Call them correction. It will just spread like wildfire. Wildfire if nobody wear masks, because you are not able to always identify infectious sources. And then with the crowded condition Hong Kong faces, then there will be many community cases. Yeah, it will be a public health disaster. Respirators are designed to protect the user because they want to keep the contaminants out. This, actually in the healthcare environment, is meant to protect the patients. Again, this is not 100%, but I think mechanically it certainly can block off a majority part of the aerosol, particularly those in front of you, and reduce the dose of exposure.
I know you're supposed to change like every day, but because I don't have too many of them, so I change it maybe like 2 or 3 days. I know it's not a very good thing to do, so yeah.
My fighting material, my handkerchief. and some, I don't know how to say, budget ball. And then I combine together and use some wire for the top, and then some elastic, and just sew it myself.
Actually, a client of mine that is from Brazil, he saw the situation here was a bit tough, and actually here was not quite easy to find those masks. I saw this kind of mask, which is like with the filter N95, in the pharmacy over here, and they were selling for $1,800 for 10 masks, which is quite expensive, of course, and so he was selling like a bunch over, and then I'm giving to my friends. And
not so comfortable, but however, that is prevent sick. That's good.
Sorry? Yeah.
Still on the topic of the coronavirus outbreak, another 88 people aboard a cruise ship off Japan have tested positive for the said virus, authorities said Tuesday, as those free of the disease hoped they were spending their own last night on board before disembarking. The new cases take the total from the Diamond Princess to 542, easily the biggest cluster outside the epicenter in China, as the cruise ship has proved an especially virulent breeding ground for the virus despite the quarantine. The new cases will be sent to specialized hospitals, the ministry said in a statement, without giving further details such as their nationalities. 65 of those who tested positive were not yet showing symptoms. Great Britain has become the latest country to offer its citizens a way off the boat, saying it was, quote, working to organize a flight back to the UK, end of quote, as doubts grow over the effectiveness of the quarantine measures with every spike in positive cases. Canada, Australia, Hong Kong, and South Korea have already said they will evacuate their citizens from the ship, following the lead from the United States, which flew home around 300 Americans on Monday, including more than a dozen who had tested positive. The U.S. and Australia have told citizens that if they decline repatriation and an additional 14-day quarantine, they will not be allowed home for at least 2 weeks, suggesting they do not believe the ship-based quarantine worked. Japan has been forced to defend its policy amid criticism for the way it handled the situation, with dozens of new infections detected almost daily since the ship arrived in early February.
Meanwhile, officials said 13 U.S. citizens deemed high risk for the deadly new coronavirus are being treated at a federally designated facility in the University of Nebraska following their evacuation from a cruise ship in Japan. Let's listen in.
Late last night at about 2 or 3 this morning, we were asked to bring some individuals here, individuals who had either tested positive or had a high likelihood of testing positive because of symptoms they were exhibiting. These individuals were brought here because we have the personnel, we have the facilities, we have the resources and the expertise to handle these kind of individuals. So this morning we did have 13 individuals who arrived on the 2 planes. These are individuals who may be a higher potential risk. And because we did have the purpose-built facility that was developed and built in partnership with the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness Response, we really had an ideal venue for these individuals to come here for their observation and care if needed.
One patient was transported to the hospital, to the biocontainment unit, because of a chronic condition, and also was experiencing some mild symptoms, feeling lightheaded, and was having a little bit of shortness of breath at the time. So was transported to the hospital for further evaluation and observation. The remainder of the patients were transported to the quarantine unit.
A total of 338 Americans were flown home from the Diamond Princess cruise ship off Japan's Yokohama, touching down first at Travis Air Force Base in California shortly before midnight on Sunday. The second flight arrived early Monday at Joint Base San Antonio, Lackland, Texas. Shortly before the flights left Japan, U.S. officials were informed that 14 of the passengers tested days earlier had received positive results. Some patients were also being treated at hospitals near the California base. The medical staff in Nebraska are retesting the cases for themselves after those patients were placed in isolated areas of the two planes for the journey home.
The folks that are over in the quarantine center have all been now tested, and so we're waiting for those results. We just felt like that was a great idea because I think we just weren't clear, about all the information. So they're all in separate rooms that have engineering controls, and we're just kind of working through getting to know them a little bit more.
Now, Japan said on Tuesday that it had completed tests on a coronavirus-riddled cruise ship docked near Tokyo, as those free of the disease hope to spend their last night before disembarking. Now, the Diamond Head Princess has become a particularly virulent breeding ground for the new coronavirus, which has affected at least 454 among the 3,700 passengers and crew, easily the second biggest global cluster outside the Chinese epicenter. Now, in a letter sent to passengers, authorities explained that some test results would take time to process and that therefore, quote, we plan the disembarkation to take place from 19 to 21 February, end of quote. If you and your roommate are both negative and have no fever or respiratory symptoms, you will be able to prepare for disembarkation, according to the letter. But those who had close contact with anyone who tested positive will have their quarantine reset to those dates. The crew, some of whom have complained about their conditions on board, are also expected to remain to observe another quarantine period after the last passengers leave the ship. The Americans already evacuated will have to go another 14-day quarantine in the U.S. Canada said Tuesday it had arranged a chartered flight to repatriate nationals from the Diamond Princess, but gave no details when it would take place. There were 256 Canadians on board the ship, with 32 so far testing positive for the virus. Korea will send presidential aircraft on Tuesday to fly back 4 nationals and 1 Japanese spouse, according to an official who told reporters. There are 14 South Koreans on board, but the other 10 have declined to be evacuated because they live in Japan, the Yonhap news agency reported. While foreign governments have couched their decision to remove citizens as an attempt to reduce the burden on Japanese authorities, many have interpreted the evacuations as tacit criticism of Tokyo's handling of the situation. The U.S. and Australia have told citizens that if they decline repatriation and an additional 14-day quarantine, they will not be allowed home for at least 2 weeks, indicating that they do not believe that the ship-based quarantine is working.
Meanwhile, the head of the World Health Organization, or WHO, said Chinese medical data shows that more than 80% of patients have mild symptoms and will recover, while 14% suffer from severe complications such as pneumonia. They also said that a new Chinese study suggests virus is not as severe as the SARS, but it is more contagious. Earlier, former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb told CNBC the fast-spreading coronavirus outbreak in China is likely more contagious, but less severe than the SARS epidemic that rattled markets back in 2003 and slowed global economic growth. Take a look.
It also appears that COVID-19 is not as deadly as other coronaviruses, including SARS and MERS. More than 80% of patients have mild disease and will recover. This new data address some of the gaps in our understanding, but others remain. The international team of experts now on the ground in China is working with Chinese counterparts to better understand those gaps and improve our understanding of the outbreak. But we have not seen the urgency in funding that we need. As I keep saying, we have a window of opportunity now. We need resources now to ensure countries are prepared now. We don't know how long this window of opportunity will remain open. Let's not squander it.
Meanwhile, WHO's Dr. Michael Ryan explains why the organization is not classifying the COVID-19 outbreak as a global pandemic. Let's listen in.
So it's not. Yeah, I think we need to be extremely cautious in using the term pandemic. We had lots of controversies during the H1N1 situation around when it was pandemic and when it wasn't pandemic, and I think we need to be careful. The real issue here is whether we're seeing efficient community transmission outside of China, and at the present time, we're not observing that.
Chinese health officials Monday urged patients who have recovered from the coronavirus to donate blood so that the plasma can be extracted to treat others who are critically ill. Drug makers are racing to develop a vaccine for treatment for the epidemic, which has killed more than 1,700 people and infected over 70,000 people across China. Plasma from patients who have recovered from a spell of pneumonia triggered by COVID-19 contains antibodies that can help reduce the virus load in critically ill patients. An official from China's National Health Commission told in a press briefing Monday. 11 patients at a hospital in Wuhan, the epicenter of the disease, received plasma infusions last week, said Sun Yanrong of the Biological Center at the Ministry of Science and Technology. Quote, one patient has already been discharged, one is able to get off the bed and walk, and the others are all recovering, end of quote. Speaking to reporters in Geneva, Mike Ryan, the head of WHO's Health Emergencies Program, said using convalescent plasma was a very valid approach to the test. But it has to be carefully timed to maximize the boost to a patient's immunity.
Sylvie, with some details. The use of convalescent plasma or hyperimmune globulin has been part of the treatment of severe infectious diseases going back almost to the beginning of when we understood viral infection. We see it in rabies, we've seen it in other infections, and it has proven effective and life-saving in a number of different diseases. Diphtheria being one most recently, where we use a similar approach. So it is a very important area to pursue, and again we will need to look at how it's used, which patients are most likely to benefit from its use, when during the course of the illness it will be beneficial. Because what hyperimmune globulin does is it concentrates the antibodies in a recovered patient, and you're essentially giving the new victim's immune system a boost. You're giving them a boost of antibodies to hopefully get them through the very difficult phase. So it must be given at the right time, because it mops up the virus in the system, and it just gives the new patient's immune system a vital push at the time it needs it. But it has to be carefully timed, and it's not always successful. So it's a very important area of discovery, and I believe they're starting trials on that in China. But it's a very valid way to explore therapeutics, especially when we don't have vaccines or we don't have specific antivirals.
And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
Philippines, Manila or Quezon City is a popular destination. But oftentimes the hustle and bustle of the city can be more stressful on your vacation. So when you feel the need to reconnect to nature or relax again, there's a beautiful oasis just outside of the city called the Garden at Ciudad de Victoria. That you can see here include hydrangea, snapdragon, and stargazers. They're truly beautiful. The gardens at Ciudad de Victoria are so peaceful, tranquil, and beautiful that it's become a haven for young couples and a very popular venue for engagement photos. The next time you want an escape from the big city, the garden at Ciudad de Victoria is a wonderful place to visit.
Welcome back. Britain on Monday battled the fallout from Storm Dennis after the second severe storm in 7 days left one woman dead over the weekend. Take a look. Winds of more than 90 miles or 140 kilometers an hour, along with more than a month's worth of rain in 48 hours in some places, led officials to issue rare danger to life warnings. A 55-year-old woman was found dead after being swept away by the flood-prone town of Tenbury Wells in western England. James Bevan, chief executive of the Environment Agency, which is responsible for flood protection, said more than 400 homes in England had been flooded, while at least 1,000 agency staff were working to protect and support those communities which have been hit. Two rivers in South Wales burst their banks on Sunday, prompting rescue workers to launch operations to evacuate hundreds of people and their pets trapped in their homes. Police also said a man in his 60s died after entering the River Taw, north of the Welsh city of Swansea, but later clarified that the death was not linked to the adverse weather. Meanwhile, the bodies of two men were pulled from rough seas off the south coast of England on Saturday as the storm barreled in. Britain's Coast Guard said it had sent a helicopter and rescue team to join Navy and other search vessels after receiving reports of a man overboard in the sea near Margate, Kent. Around the same time in nearby Herne Bay, emergency responders discovered another dead man following reports a person had been pulled from the sea, according to Kent police. Now, in a timely announcement, the Met Office, Britain's meteorological service, said on Monday it would invest £1.2 billion in a state-of-the-art supercomputer to improve forecasting. The government claims it's the world's most powerful weather and climate supercomputer.
Three in 4 Australians, almost 18 million people, were affected by the country's deadly bushfire crisis, according to a survey released Tuesday that also pointed to plummeting support for the government and coal projects. The Australian National University study showed the vast human scale of the 5-month crisis, which killed more than 30 people and destroyed thousands of homes. Quote, nearly every Australian has been touched by these fires, and many of us will be living with the effects for years and years to come, end of quote, according to lead social researcher Nicholas Biddle. The poll of 3,000 people indicated that 14% of the adult population was directly affected, with their homes lost or damaged or families forced to evacuate. Those nearly 3 million people were eclipsed by another 15 million Australians who had indirect exposure, including being affected by bushfire smoke or having holiday plans hit. The scale of the impact shocked researchers and will be cause for concern in Canberra, where the government has struggled to shake public perception that it botched the crisis response and cares little for addressing climate change. Scientists say the fires were fueled by drought and unfavorable weather conditions that were exacerbated by climate change.
In other news, international donors pledged 1.15 billion euros to help Albania recover from a powerful earthquake last year, according to the EU chief, more than double the sum expected by Tirana. Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama said the sum, which exceeds the total recovery bill of 1.08 billion euros, assessed by the UN, was quote, beyond my wildest imagination, having begun the day hoping for pledges of only 400 million euros. The money will help the impoverished Balkan state rebuild and recover after the 6.4 magnitude quake, which hit in November, killing 51 people and leaving 17,000 homeless.
Albania is not alone. We will accompany Albania throughout the recovery phase. Albania is for us an important partner and a friend of the European Union, and the European Union stands for solidarity and responsibility. In my view, it is high time that we start accession talks with North Macedonia and Albania. We asked a lot of them. They kept to their promises. They did all the things we asked them to fulfill, which was quite a journey to go. So I think now it's on our side to be reliable and to work for the common goal.
I remember very well what you told me, that beyond the very kind words of consolation, you promised to embark together with me in this effort, and you told me that we would not be alone.
Part of the reason the quake caused so much damage, experts say, was the scourge of illegal construction, which has seen builders and engineers in the former communist state flout safety codes for decades. President Rama said what we reconstruct should be better than what we lost, suggesting that new earthquake resistance and environmental standards could be imposed.
Still in Albania, before the pledge meeting, Albanian expectations had been dampened by what Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama called a, quote, political earthquake back in October. That's when 3 EU states blocked Tirana from starting membership talks to join the bloc, the second such delay in less than 6 months. France, which led the Netherlands and Denmark in October's veto, softened its opposition at the weekend after the European Commission, the bloc's executive, proposed a tougher and more political admissions process for new members. French President Emmanuel Macron said that if a commission report on Albania and fellow hopeful North Macedonia next month confirms enough progress on reforms, he would be ready to agree to start the long accession process.
You know, we have to be realistic and not raise the expectations beyond a certain bar, because we have learned the hard way that we should not have excessive expectations from today's European Union. I don't think Europe has to do a favor to us. I think we need Europe as much as Europe needs us, because it's not feasible to have... Because Emmanuel Macron has a vision and not a tactical position. He's strategic in what he thinks and in what he wants, and he is not about accommodating local politics by playing, you know, the tough guy on one or the other countries. Other earthquake came from the ground of Albania. We didn't need this earthquake.
A Russian-backed regime offensive in northwest Syria has displaced 900,000 people since the start of December, and babies are dying of cold because aid camps are full, according to the UN. That figure is 100,000 more than the United Nations had previously recorded.
Mark Lowcock, the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, said in a statement today that the crisis there has reached a horrifyingly new level, stressing that the only option is a ceasefire. He says that, since December 1st, 900,000 people, the vast majority of them women and children, have been displaced. Mr. Lowcock said that these people are traumatized and forced to sleep outside in freezing temperatures because camps are full. He stressed that the violence in northwest Syria is indiscriminate, with health facilities, schools, residential areas, mosques, and markets having been hit. The Undersecretary General said there are now reports that settlements for displaced people are being hit, resulting in deaths, injuries, and further displacement. A huge relief operation across the border from Turkey is underway, but it is overwhelmed. Mr. Lowcock underscored that the biggest humanitarian horror story of the 21st century will only be avoided if Security Council members and those with influence overcome individual interests and put a collective stake in humanity first.
The Idlib region, including parts of neighboring Aleppo province, is home to some 3 million people, half of them already displaced from other parts of the country. The offensive that began late last year has caused the biggest single displacement of people since conflict began in 2011. The war has killed more than 380,000 people since it erupted almost 9 years ago, following the brutal repression of popular demonstrations demanding regime change.
In other news, the Boy Scouts of America filed for bankruptcy in what it said was an effort to safeguard compensation payouts for sexual abuse victims. The organization has been accused of covering up generations of abuse inflicted on thousands of its young members and failing to do enough to root out pedophiles using the youth movement to prey on minors over its 110-year history. Bankruptcy proceedings will help the Boy Scouts to, quote, equitably compensate victims through the establishment of a victims' compensation trust and allow the organization to continue at a local level, according to a statement from the group. The organization estimates liabilities of up to $1 billion, according to court filings lodged on Tuesday. More than 12,000 members of the Boy Scouts had been sexually abused in the organization since 1944, according to the victim's lawyer, Jeff Anderson. He also said files maintained by the Boy Scouts listed more than 7,800 alleged perpetrators of sexual abuse. The existence of that documentation, known as the perversion files, enlisting scoutmasters or troop leaders accused of sexual abuse, was first revealed in a 2012 court case. Now, at the time, the organization admitted its response to the scandal had been plainly insufficient, inappropriate, or wrong, and said it had overhauled its procedures to protect its members. Founded in 1910, the Boy Scouts of America currently has around 2.2 million members between the ages of 5 and 21.
Moving on to New Zealand, its parliamentarians consider Philippine visit a success. Our bureau chief in New Zealand, Greg Bessa, has this report.
A delegation from the New Zealand Parliament, composed of the National Party leader, the Honorable Simon Bridges, former cabinet ministers, the Honorable Jerry Brownlee and Mark Mitchell, and Attorney Paulo Garcia, visited the Philippines for 3 days, from the 19th to 22nd of January this year. No other than the Honorable Simon Bridges, the head of the delegation, who gladly and proudly recounted the memorable and productive visit as he emphasized its significance to strengthen further the friendly ties between New Zealand and the Philippines.
Good afternoon, Honorable Simon Bridges. Many Filipinos here in New Zealand were happy to know that you, along with Honorable Jerry Brownlee, Honorable Mark Mitchell, and of course our very own Attorney Pablo Garcia, visited the Philippines last month, though it was only for 3 days. Now, what was the purpose of that visit? And then in relation to this question, what benefits did it generate as far as strengthening the bilateral ties between the Philippines and New Zealand?
It was a great visit, and I think it was significant because it is the first, I think, properly bilateral visit between New Zealand and the Philippines, where senior politicians haven't been going for any other reason like APEC or something else. I think there were two big things that were important. One is that I know, and you know, the Philippines and New Zealand, we're in the same neighbourhood. Naturally, we're on the ring of fire, we have natural disasters, but of course, politically, we're close to many countries like China and other Asian nations, and so we have the same international issues. We both share the same South China Seas strait there, where most of our trade, New Zealand's trade, goes by, and so there's a lot of common issues to discuss in that matter. I think the other important thing is the people-to-people contact. You know, we've had long connections, but relatively superficial. And what we're seeing in New Zealand is massive growth in our Filipino community, which is adding so much to New Zealand. And so the ability to be there and understand that and encourage that growth in the links between our countries and Filipinos or Kiwi Nois who are here in New Zealand was a really good, important part of it as well. Look, in terms of what came from the visit, I think a lot of things. We established very good relationships, my colleagues and I, with Manny Pacquiao, with Cardinal Tagle, with the Mayor of Manila, with a number of senior secretaries in Foreign Affairs and Defence, and so we've got some good relationships. And I know that I will be back to capitalise on those relationships in the next term of Parliament as Prime Minister of New Zealand, we hope.
Now, I understand, Honourable Simon, that during the visit you and the delegation had a number of high-level meetings with Philippine officials, one of whom was Senator Manny Pacquiao.
Yes.
As you know it already, Senator Manny Pacquiao is considered as a national hero by the Filipino people, both those who are living in the Philippines and abroad, because he has brought so much pride and honor to the country by winning a number of boxing world titles in different divisions. Now, how did you find meeting with him during your visit?
Just great. And we met him at the Senate, and he was very gracious, gave us a good amount of time. And in fact, we then went down onto the floor of the Senate. I think it was the first day of the Senate for this year. And we met many senators, but you know, of course, Manny Pacquiao is world famous, one of the best all-time boxers, and so it was great to be able to tell, you know, my family and my father-in-law and many others that we had met. We also talked about politics though, and how he sees politics in the Philippines. And Manny let me in on a secret. I think that he would really love to come to New Zealand, and he's looking for a way to come here because he told me he's been to Canada, but he wants to come here. He knows how beautiful it will be, and we said when he comes, we would love to have a function or a gathering with the New Zealand Filipino community.
That's a great news, Honourable Simon. Now, this was your first visit to the Philippines, and I may say it will not be your last.
Yes.
Okay. Now, how did you find the country and the people? And in relation to that, were you able to pick up or learn some Filipino words during the visit?
Yes. Well, you know, in fact, I've been there before. I've been once for meetings in Cebu, which was great, and I will never forget the beautiful mangoes, and I had some more of them on this trip. Most delicious fruit in the world. But This was the most significant trip, and I hadn't been to Manila and seen all of the things there. We had a great time. I mean, the Filipino people are beautiful, hospitable, friendly people with great values. And this is why it's so important to have Filipinos in New Zealand. You have a great advantage, that is meaning Philippines has great growth at the moment economically, and that is a young, large population of English-speaking skilled people, and we're getting the benefit of that in New Zealand, in our farming, in our construction, in our IT, in our health sectors, and so on. And so that is great, and I think that will be good for both countries. Look, we also had some fun. We did many things. I have a Filipino word for you. I hope you'll laugh.
Now, Honorable Simon, as you may know it also, that the population of the Filipinos here in New Zealand for the past 10 years has increased significantly. Yeah. And many of the Filipinos now here are providing the much needed skilled manpower to vital industries of New Zealand. For example, in dairy farming, in information technology, healthcare, nursing, and even in the construction industry, which are making great contributions to the New Zealand economy. Now, do you have any message to the Filipinos here in New Zealand?
We just value what you do so much. You make New Zealand a better country with your skills, with your family values, and with all that you provide. I think it's good for the Philippines as well. And you can, by being here, I think, contribute to both countries. When we were in the Philippines, the senior politicians we met were very glad to know that we have great labour laws and human rights laws here, and so that when Filipinos come here, they are going well and they are well treated. My message to the Filipino community in New Zealand is we want you, we value you, and we want to see more of you. I think, if you think about New Zealand, here is an amazing fact for you. Nearly 1/3, 27% of New Zealanders today were born overseas. At the moment, if you take Chinese New Zealanders, that's about 5% of our population. Filipinos, just 1%. But I know that's going to continue to grow, and that will be 2, 3, 4, maybe 5% in the long term for New Zealand, as more Filipinos come here and make New Zealand their home, provide your skills and your great values, but also, don't lose your Filipino identity.
Thank you, Honorable Simon, for your time, for this moment.
Thank you so much.
Much as the Honorable Simon Bridges was satisfied with the outcome of the visit and is looking forward to another one in the near future, former Defense Minister of New Zealand, the Honorable Mark Mitchell, mentioned some areas of interest that need close collaborative engagements between the governments of these two countries.
It's important to take a strong delegation to the Philippines in support of Simon Bridges, our leader, and so two of the external portfolio holders, Jerry Brownlee, who has Foreign Affairs, and myself, who have the Defence portfolio, accompanied Simon. We met with your Foreign Affairs Secretary, and we also had a very good meeting with your Secretary of Defence. For me, that was important and significant because obviously the Philippines is in our region, it's in our own backyard, and they've had to deal with some very difficult issues around Abu Sayyaf, Islamic extremism in Mindanao, and so it was very useful to get a briefing and an update on that from the Minister, and for us to have the opportunity to recommit and say that we understand that we would have a responsibility in terms of assisting should there be any other further unrest or issues around Abu Sayyaf.
On the lighter side of the visit, Attorney Paulo Garcia, the first Member of Parliament of Filipino descent, happily shared the relaxing moments of the delegation, like when they tasted some of the favorite yet iconic food of the Filipino people.
It was very light-hearted as well because I saw that we all enjoyed the Philippines, especially eating Jollibee. Nasarapan po sila, no? And they really enjoyed that portion. They also enjoyed having a cold halo-halo sa Via Maris sa Greenbelt. Really, it was timely because ang init-init and we were walking around and it was a timely cold and welcoming dessert for them. So all in all, they experienced so much, met really great people. At the same time, building those initial contacts that would facilitate, for sure, deeper relations, more trade in the future, easier acknowledgements and getting together because we have met many of the people who count and who are decision makers in the Philippines, and we have put them together with the decision makers here in New Zealand.
At Parliament Grounds in Wellington, New Zealand, this is Greg Besa. I am and will always be one with 25.
Back for more news, stay tuned.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Andyan ang MTRCB.
Asia-focused banking giant HSBC axed 35,000 jobs, far more than expected, and posted slumping annual profits as it warned over the financial impact of the deadly coronavirus. The pre-tax profits tumbled by a third to $13.3 billion in 2019 from a year earlier, largely owing to a $7.3 billion write-off related to its investment and commercial banking businesses in Europe. The London-based lender added in a results statement that it hopes to cut its global workforce by 15% to 200,000 staff over the next 3 years. Commentators had expected 10,000 job cuts. The radical overhaul comes as HSBC streamlines operations in the United States and Europe, although no details were given on where the axe would fall. HSBC has been trying to lower costs as it faces a multitude of uncertainties caused by the grinding U.S.-China trade war, Britain's departure from the European Union, and now the fatal new coronavirus in China.
Apple announced Monday it would miss its March quarter revenue forecast, and global iPhone supplies would fall because of the deadly coronavirus epidemic, triggering a fall in Asian stock markets. The COVID-19 death toll now exceeds 1,800 in China, where it has affected more than 72,000 after emerging in the central province of Hubei in December. The virus has sparked global economic jitters, with travel bans and mass quarantines inside China forcing factories to suspend operations and shops to close. Apple, which depends on components from Chinese suppliers and has a big market in China, has been hammered on both fronts. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Tumblr. Also check out our boards in Pinterest and pictures on Instagram. And check us out on YouTube, Eagle News channel. I'm Alfred Esanas. Thanks for joining us.
And that's the news for tonight. Join us online and here again tomorrow evening. From all of us here at Eagle News, I'm Alma Angeles. And
we're one with 25.